Okay, so one thing that I would like to do next is I would like to kind of refactor this stuff a little bit. So we're going to be working on the timeline activity next, right? And we're going to need to read the data from the database. And this guy is saving the data in the database. So what it sounds to me like is that there's some repetition there in the amount of work, right? In both cases, we need to open up the database, and we need to basically worry about all the database related stuff. And we also talked about that yesterday briefly, how too much of the system right now knows about the database intricacies, right? So we may not like that because you kind of want to try to keep things loosely coupled. In other words, abstracted from one another, so that if we do not like SQLite database or something, for whatever reason, we can at some point get rid of it and so forth. We don't have it yet. We're about to, right? We don't have a repetition yet. We're about to. But think about what is going to be the job of the timeline activity. This is the guy that actually shows us everything that we have. So this is going to be the guy that, if you remember on my sample app that I have, let me see if I have it running still. Guess what? It's not running. So let me go to my sample. So this is the timeline activity that we're about to start working on. So guess what? This guy is reading data from the database, right? So it's doing this, reading it. So it needs to also get a DB helper, open it up, say blah blah blah, right? So there's a lot of work there. So what I would like to do is I would like to refactor it now, and it's a good way to sort of pick up, pick up where we left off yesterday, just to kind of like refresh all that and so forth. So what I'm proposing is to create a class that's going to be responsible for everything data, right? And we're going to hang that class off of the application. So it's going to be readily available to the rest of our system. Make sense? So I'm going to call this class StatusData, just because that's what we're saving. StatusData, corresponds to status database, right? So, and we're going to hang it off of the application eventually. So we're going to do two things. We're going to start by, so I'm going to close all this for now. So we're going to create a new class. So basically right click on your package, right? Before I just do that, I want to make sure that I actually did create a new copy of Yamba for you guys yesterday. 1, 2, and yesterday was 3, right? Compress. So I wanna have it incremental so that you guys know that which zip file corresponds to what. Okay. So right click, new, and a Java class, and I'm gonna call it status data. Since it's Java, it's gonna be capital S, capital D, right? Bam. There it is. And status data right now is going to be just a plain Java object, right? It's not subclassing anything special. It's going to know about the context, so it's going to need a context. So I'm going to define my standard variable, so private static final string tag, right? Remember how we always do that? Status data dot class dot get simple name, and I'm going to define context. So context, so just that we have it, and I'm going to create a constructor public status data. So far I'm just kind of creating a shell, right? It doesn't really do much. My goal is that this status data is going to have all our data related functionality, right? And it's going to be the only one that actually uses data DB helper, right? So it's going to have a DB helper. So I'm going to create DB helper as a as a relation as a object, and when we create the new status data, we're going to create DB helper is new DB helper this. Sorry, not this, but context. So we're going to pass the context into it because that's what we need it for. So far, so good. So just to kind of think about this, so if DB helper is only going to be used by status data, does it make sense to keep DB helper as a separate class? Yeah, this is the kind of situation where you may want to move DB helper into make it an inner class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut or copy the entire DB helper. So basically all this stuff that we did, right? And I'm going to put it inside of this class status data. Organize imports. Let's see what the error is. So I have an error right here. I'm sorry? Yes, yeah, that's a good point. It should be a private class, right?
So you copy the whole thing?
Yeah. So I copied basically everything inside of the DB helper. So, minus the imports because you're gonna do organize imports in the other one, right? Make sense?
Shouldn't we be using the context from the status data class instead of declaring another context inside DB data?
We're not defining a new context. We're just defining a reference to a context. So a context is going to get passed into it. Sorry, in this guy. So the context is going to get passed into status data. And we're just passing it. Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So now we have it. Yes. Yeah, so this becomes a good point. So this becomes, yeah, so we don't actually need this anymore because context is now known inside of status data. Yes, good point. So we don't need the multiple variables pointing to a context. Right. So DB helper can now use the context that was defined at the level of status data.
But it's reverse of refactoring, right? In this case, we are bringing in, we could have added some functionality in DB helper, like maybe get data or something like that.
Yeah, so yeah, we're gonna add that functionality to deal with data to status data, right? But DB helper is gonna be helping status data to complete that functionality. So as opposed to making, see, DB helper is really responsible for opening and closing the database.
Oh, it's not for querying and
yeah, so we're making status data be responsible for that. So status data is going to be responsible for all the data related functionality, and it's using the right. So the structure is going to be like this. So it's going to be status data, right? And status data has a DB helper. So DB helper, right? So uses DB helper and then provides all the functionality, and then it's gonna be Yamba application that has status data. Make sense?
So this status data, so we'll have two classes or two entities mainly for database functionality. One is DB helper, which is only used for creating and initializing the database, and for all the other data functions, let's say if anything else comes up, any other view we add data on, which needs insert or view or fetch query, that will use status data for that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. So basically, status. But we, at the outside world, is only going to be concerned with status data. It doesn't care that the status data internally uses database.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So so with that, we now basically have a simpler. We have something called status data that we're going to be using. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hang status data off of the application, Yamba application, so that it's available to everyone, right? So I'm going to make private. Actually, I don't need. I'm not going to make it private. I'll say status data, status data. And then in on create, we're going to create status data. So status data is new status data, and we pass this into it. So the status data has the context. So we basically declare it as part of the Yamba application, and we initialize it here. So those two lines are new, basically, in Yamba application. So far, so good? So again, we just basically are hanging. So it's Yamba application that has a status data. So this is has a relationship. So this is status data, right? So in the future, we're just going to be able to ask anywhere in the system for Yamba application status data. So anywhere in our system, we now have access to status data, right? Question?
What is the reason for passing the context?
What is the reason for passing a context? Context is sort of gives. See, remember how we said our application is really everything here, right? So this is everything is application. So application sort of knows, or bits and pieces of application know who they belong to based on their context. So the context for an application decides on everything from like which process it belongs to, what file system it has, what resources it's got access to, and so forth. So it's sort of like an abstract concept that gives you, gives you your membership in the club, right? Gives you context for your code. So an activity doesn't know who it belongs to other than the context that it has. By inheriting from context, it knows which app it's part of and so on. So activities, services, application, they're all subclasses, they're all children of context, right?
Share one activity, let's say, between two applications.
Can you share one activity between two applications? Not really. I mean, you can copy your class from one, and have two copies of classes, but they're going to belong to their two different contexts. Yeah. What's possible to do is it's possible to share to have multiple applications share the same context. That's possible to do. So that means that you have both apps signed with the same key, belong to the same package, and then they can share the context. In other words, you can have two applications like that, for example, share the same file structure, the private file system, right? Yeah. Okay. So now that, sorry, any other questions?
But they will still have two APKs, right?
Yeah, you would have two separate APKs that share the same contextual stuff, like the process ID and the file system. Okay, so if I look at how we use database in our updater service, remember I said this is not very the efficient code. We like here open the database, we created the content values, and then we close the database. I would like to have this responsibility shifted now to StatusData, because I would like StatusData to be responsible for everything database related. So so basically what we're doing is we're hiding the information about how insert happens, what algorithm we're using for, when problems happen. All that stuff we're putting now in StatusData, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create in StatusData a new method called I'm going to push the DB helper lower. Let me just kind of document it. So class to help open create create upgrade database. Okay, so I'm gonna push the responsibility. I'm gonna push the DB helper lower. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to create a public insert. I don't know if it's going to be an int. For now, I'll just return void. We may change that later on. Content values. Values. And so this is going to be responsible for inserting into the database. So this is going to be our code that inserts into the database. Right? Now the question is, do this again like this. Inserts into. The question is, I said I'm trying to kind of not explain, not have to show the world that we're using something that's database specific, right? So so we're trying to hide the fact that we're using DB and all that from the outside stuff, and we want to package all that inside of StatusData. Now the question is, what about content values? I'm using this thing called content values. Isn't that a database related thing? Because we introduced it as part of the database. Yeah, so that's a good point. So content values, as you can see from its package where it belongs to, come on mouse, show, it's part of Android content values. In other words, it's bigger than the database. It goes beyond database. Somebody was asking yesterday about it. I think you were saying that why does it say here if you're using content providers don't use anything from the database package? Well, that's why, because we are abstracting. If you're using the data in a more generic way, we don't want to tell the world, we don't even want to include database related stuff, right? So that's what I'm kind of trying to point out, that content values really has nothing to do with the database. It's just a very generic name value pair table. It's a map, essentially it's a map, and it goes beyond how it's implemented. It could be used for database purposes, but it could be used for other purposes as well. So that functionality now that we had here, sorry? So this open database stuff, I'm gonna cut, I'm gonna copy it for now, and later on I'm gonna go back here and yank a bunch of stuff out, right? But that functionality that we have here, I'm gonna basically copy in here. So we open the database, right? We insert into the database. So I'm gonna copy it for now, so we have duplicates, right? And then I'm gonna close the database. Except that I don't need to be opening and closing DB helper, because DB helper is something that we already created globally, right? For status data. So DB helper in itself is not holding any resource. Its job is just to create a database if one doesn't exist, right? It's what is holding a resource is get writable database. That's why we want to undo whatever we do here, right? So we are basically opening, closing database right within this block, right? We get writable database and we close writable database right here.
So, can you just explain the difference between what getting an instance of DB helper means as opposed to getting an instance of get writable database and DB helper?
So what it means to get instance of,
So you're getting an instance of DB helper. That means you have something that extends that SQL like open helper.
right?
So that's probably already giving you a connection to your database, or no?
So DB helper is, I guess I should really rename it at some point to DB open helper. So its job is to open up a database. But let me rephrase that. It opens up a database, not the actual database connection. Yeah. So let's say it like this. It opens up the connection to the database server, but quote unquote server, because it's not a server, right? So it provides connectivity to that mechanism, but it's the actual get writable database that actually gives you a connection, and it gives you in this case means that you are the only one who can write to it at the time. So it actually locks the resource. Yeah. So in other words, DB helper can live for a much longer lifetime. Like opening up a DB helper, you can do it when the phone boots and never close it until the phone shuts down, and that's fine. It's not holding any valuable resource other than a little bit of memory. DB get writable database actually opens up a database for a while, right?
DB helper is just a DB creator, basically.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So DB
what
help.
are the other methods in SQL like open helper that implement other than on create
Well, it's you. So you can put.
or on upgrade? Those are only two.
Yeah, so if I put my mouse here and I go source, override implement methods, Eclipse should be smart enough to show us what options we have. So close, get readable, get writable, and open. So you can do something on open, and something on close if you wanted to. And get readable, get writable database, you can override them, but we don't override it, we actually use it. So we use it here, yeah.
So when you get writable database, you are open the database.
When you get a writable database, you, what?
You are open the database.
Yes. Yes, exactly. You open it for writing, and you get exclusive lock to it. So is everyone now okay with our new insert method? Right?
So are you creating a DB connection? Is that equivalent to like a DB connection now with SQLite database?
Yeah, so the SQLite database is a connection to an actual database, yes. So now,
Once again, why you need that DB helper right above the get writable database?
why do I have it here?
No, right above the data, right above database. That's a DB helper, right? So you need that's not because of DB helper Java, they only define the DB helper.
Yeah, so we now have a bunch of duplicates. So now we're gonna go into like trimming mode, right? We're gonna cut out a bunch of stuff. So Good point. So I'm going to go now to the service, and all this stuff that we had to open up the database, okay, gone. All the stuff that we had to close the database, likewise gone. And now to save something into a database, okay, gone. So how we're gonna save this stuff? Well, we need access to our Yamba application, which is, this is how we get our Yamba application, right? And then status data and then insert. But so now, you know, since I have this Yamba application all over the place, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually define it. I'm gonna define it like. What do we want to define it? We can define it in a constructor. I can say Yamba application, Yamba, just to make it shorter, okay? Sorry, and like that, okay? And then I'm just gonna say Yamba is that, right? Just I'm shortening it a little bit, right? And then I'm gonna replace this with Yamba to make it shorter as well. So Yamba get weather, right? Gets the latest weather, and then we do Twitter update. Okay. So similarly, and now I could actually make this even shorter. So I'm gonna replace that like that. So I don't even need the object weather, right? So Yamba get weather and get friends timeline, right? So
what was the updater class again?
updater class was the thread. Updater class is our separate thread, which we create when services started and stopped, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And now, when I insert, so it's not correct to say insert into database because we don't know it's database. We just say insert data, right? And I'm simply gonna say yamba dot status data dot insert values, right? So this is why I simplified stuff. So that's what I mean by refactoring it. I now outsource the job of dealing with saving data to some other object which is hanging off of a Yamba application, which is readily available to us, right, throughout the system. And so I say insert in there.
Actually, where you declare this Yamba?
Yeah, so I just defined it here just to save myself typing, but it's this well-known stuff, right? Get application, we cast it to Yamba application, right? Yeah. And I just defined it global to my to, yeah. We could have made it global to the entire updater service, not just the updater class. But yeah, I don't know.
Just your opinion on this design idea. Right now, we scroll along a little bit.
Mhm.
We're still using the columns, fields defined in database helper. But since database helper was pulled into a private class of
That's right.
status data, let's say we would have deleted database helper. So my question is this, because this is what I'm trying to get what I should do here. Those constants, put them at the level of status data because it seems like there's columns, appropriate for status data. Or if you bury them inside of database helper, which is private inside of status data, we'd have to make database helper private. So just a general idea.
So that's a great point. So the point is, like, we're trying really hard to get rid of any reference to the database related stuff in updater service, or for that matter, the rest of the system. We don't want the rest of the system to know about the database because you guys asked yesterday you wanted to potentially change to some other database system, etc., etc. So your point is great. It's like, hey, but you're referring to DB helper all over the place. And the only reason why this even compiles is because I have a duplicate DB helper here. Because remember, the one that we moved to here is now private. right? So I'm about to delete this. This is gonna go away, and this is not gonna compile, right? So that's a great point. What do we do? Well, we could, one option is to make DB helper not private, and then do status data. So yamba dot status data dot DB helper dot blah. But that makes no sense. What makes more sense is to move some of this stuff that is actually relevant to the rest of the system outside. And I could pick all of them, but since I'm only picking the ones that actually are shared by the larger, group, so I'm gonna cut that out.
So why not make the status as the input parameters instead of the values? So when you get the status list, you just pass the status as the input parameters for the
Um, That's a good point. So let me just move this here. Okay, so I'll move these variables here, the database columns. Okay, and I'll get back to your point. Okay, so that's here, and then just to finish the refactoring, but I'm gonna get back to your point. It's a really good point. So now this is not DB helper we're referring to, but status data, right? Right. You meant yeah, just define that. This is just to save me from typing. You can just basically refer to this because that's how we get the reference to the application. But
Where is it moving the DB helper? Like in update a service, there is new DB helper.
so DB helper now belongs solely to database to status data. We're about to delete it from here.
Can you show me the status data? Like when you open the data?
Yeah, so I define DB helper here, right, in the constructor, and I create an instance of it right when status data is created. So it's kind of like it's a built-in component of status data. That's what DB helper is, and it's defined lower here as a private class, right? As a matter of fact, let's go now and delete DB helper, and let's see what all the other problems that generates, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and delete the DB helper class from the file system altogether. Because right now we have two. We have the one that we moved as an inner class privately, and then we have the other ones. And so now it's a mixed bag of what's referring to what. So I'm going to get rid of this. And Eclipse automatically recompiles everything. And I guess everything just compiles. So it's good. Okay. Status data, yeah. So status data now, that's where the DB helper is. So status data now houses the variable, the names of the columns, right? And right, so the status data houses the names of the columns, and then the updater service is basically referring to those status data variables. Okay, now. Is everyone good with that so far? Which one? So status data. So we move the functionality for inserting into the database here to this guy. So now, so here's a little bonus question for you guys. Back to the question. What right now we said we designed this status data to take content values and insert it. Well, what if we wanted to simplify this even further so that we're not even worried about content values, but we simply say, imagine that you can simply say insert into insert status. Imagine that you can do that. Of course, that doesn't work right now, right? So how would you outsource some of this functionality for converting into status data? That's what you were asking about, right? Okay, so I'll give that to you guys as a bonus question. So try to do that. So in other words, what you want to do is, this now doesn't compile, right? But what I want to do is create a new version of of um, this. Actually, let me do it like this. First, I'll define it. So public void insert, but as it takes a status as the data, right? Organize imports and import Twitter status because that's what status we're referring to. So this now needs to take this and insert it into the database. Okay. Inserts into database, and the only difference is that status data as provided by online service. So that's now what we want to insert, right? So I'll give you a second to do that, to update it. Okay, and go from there. Did anybody make this change? Create this method? So basically, all I need to do is I need to move the responsibility now for creating new values. So I'm gonna copy it first, and then I'll remove it, right? So it's easier for you to visualize. So now this guy creates new values. This guy copies the values from one to the other, right? And then this guy is simply gonna call in. So this dot insert values, right? So so
You need to send the whole list, right? Or you're not sending it.
well, no, the job of this guy is to insert one status at a time. So it's basically, see, as opposed to, we have two versions now of insert. We have the one that takes content values and inserts them into a database. We have another version which takes status, converts the status to content values, then calls the other guy, right? So leverages the other guy. So now you have just two different, function insert, right? So you have more, a richer API in a way, right? And so now I can simplify even further my service to yank this stuff out, and I simply say insert the data, yamba status data insert status, and all of this is actually irrelevant. So see how much simpler my service now is, right? And so it doesn't even know about database, doesn't even know about content values. I mean, that wasn't a big deal. So that was just really an extra. But basically, we get status from Twitter, we loop through it, and for each one we insert it into a database. That's it.
So by default, how many entries in the database? Maximum entries, data entries.
How many maximum entries you can have in a database? It really depends. I mean, there's no real limit. Like, how big can your database grow?
So the database can become bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I mean, there's a limit on the entire SD card. I mean, not SD card, but the data partition. But I don't know exactly what that is, and I don't think we're not gonna. At this rate, we're only growing up to 20 per 24 hours, right?
Yeah.
So we're not gonna really grow, 20 records per 24 hours. Let's say you can have 10 million records, right? Or 100 calculator, right? So let's say that's 10,000, 10 million divided by 20. So this many days. So about you know 1,300 years before we have a problem. So I wouldn't worry about that.
What did you deem a problem? What is the size you thought was a problem?
I picked 10 million records as a. I mean,
But is there like a place where you can define what the maximum records you want to keep is?
Yeah,
Like you're purging, your DB purging, do you have to take care of all that stuff here, or is that the system? Something the system takes care of?
yeah, there's a system that takes care of. And you know what you could also do? I mean, what you could also do is you could purge the data as part of the upgrade of the database, the release. So every, assuming that users use your app, they're going to want to upgrade your app, right? So whenever you release an upgrade of the app, you can change the schema to activate on upgrade, and simply non-upgrade purge the oldest million records or something like that, or the opposite, keep the youngest million records or something, and there should be plenty. But we can also, if you want, we can easily add a purge button, right? Let's do that as as a little bonus. Actually, that's a great idea. So just to demonstrate now that our what we just did is very useful. Okay, so you guys, so just to kind of illustrate, it sounds like we did a lot of this back of flipping between different files, and and refactoring tends to be confusing to people observing. It's usually obvious to me because I'm doing it and I got it conceptually, but the fact that I'm flipping between, I'm like, hey, we're creating this new file, and then we're hanging it off of this, and now this file is using this file via this file. That can get confusing. I totally get that. That's why I try to avoid flipping too many screens and having too many things open at the same time. But to demonstrate, so is everyone good with this so far? Are you compiling? Yeah, compiles, works.
No, I'll take care of it later.
Okay, so we are doing something that's sort of the same thing. So it's so let's think about this. What if I want to provide a way to delete all the data? Okay, so how would you do that? Somebody tell me.
Inside StatusData, you would have
Another
another method called delete.
Yeah. So all the data related stuff goes inside here. So you're saying have another record called public void delete, right? Simple enough, right? And deletes all the data. So you're saying in this method we're gonna delete all the data. So how do we delete all the data?
not the table.
Yeah, so so it's gonna be, we're gonna need to open the database. I know that, and we're gonna open it for writing, right? We're gonna open the database, and I know I'm gonna also need to close the database. I'm gonna copy paste, open, close. Okay. So for all these, you're gonna basically do open, close the database, right? Sorry, question?
Yeah, because we have a function called insert, right? And there you open and close it. So why don't we just take that out and just call it an initiator of the database, right? Because once you have it open, it's open until you close it, right? You can do the opening once, closing once, and in between you can.
Yeah, but I don't want to yes. Yeah, I want to make it atomic, meaning I want to open, do the job, close it, and not keep the resource open.
Don't keep it open.
Yeah, so that would be more. Yeah, that would be more proper.
Because I guess in some sense, when you have the database open and closed all the time, you could take more.
Yeah, so that comes down to a question: how many people are using this and what's using this? And status data could be used by the service as well as by activity at the same time. So if the service has it open for forever for writing, so it has a lock on it, and now we're trying to delete data from, we're going to have a conflict, right? So that's why I want to do it like this. So now I can delete the data, and so that's going to be db dot, and then I don't know, let's look, what do we have? Oh, look, there's something called delete table. Okay, that's easy, we got table. So it's going to be, the table is going to be dbhelper.dbhelper.table, right? And then the where clause and where arguments. So this is the part of, if you have a where, like if you want to say delete from blah where you know ID is greater than equal 47, right? But since we are deleting all the data. In other words, unconditionally. In other words, no condition, null. Okay, so there it is. So was it hard to implement a delete? I mean, it's a copy paste from insert, and we just changed instead of insert, we said delete, right? Like I would expect you guys to be able to extrapolate this kind of information by now, right? Update and query can't be much hard. Well, query has something special, but update, I would expect you to be able to figure it out how to use it. So we're going to open up the database for writing db.update something, and then db.close, right?
So do we want to do a button to delete it?
Right, so that's your job next. So now when I click on a menu, I would like to have a button here that says purge. Okay? So, so you tell me. Menu.xml. So to add a menu, we're going to go to values. So not values, menu. Right? And we are going to add yet another item. And it's going to be just like any other item we added. So ID matters. So ID is going to purge. Okay. Then title. I'm going to create quickly a new title. So new string. Title purge. I'll say purge. Insert it. Okay. And then the hardest part is going to be the icon, right? So while you guys are entertained with adding the rest of the stuff, I'm going to really quickly look up my Android drawables on screamingpenguin.com, which gets you there. And I'm gonna search for something that has to do with delete. I'm looking for something that starts with IC menu, because then they're kind of there you go, IC menu delete, because they're all consistently the same size. Okay, so back to this at Android column drawable / IC menu delete. So it doesn't. See, now I have an error here. Remember, XML errors are harder to find. Like you just see it here, and then stops compiling everything, and including your R file, right? So you gotta. The only clue is what you get here on the
But why I didn't get that?
You didn't.
No. So maybe I have it.
Uh-huh. What do you think is the problem? It's super hard to find.
Space after the delete.
Yeah, this is I mean, ultra hard to find, but see, I have an extra space. Like you had an extra enter yesterday, so be mindful of that. I don't see it. It's right there. Bam. And now I save it. It still shows here, so you may want to clean this, but saves it, everything compiles. Okay. So my menu is automatically now going to be there. Like, it doesn't do anything, but if I run it, my menu is absolutely going to be there. So if I click on menu, there's delete, purge. It doesn't do anything, right? Right, so exactly. So the menu processing for status activity is done in the status activity itself, right? So status activity, and we have a method called under menu stuff called on options item selected. So whenever menu gets clicked, this gets called and passes the actual item. So we just have to add another case statement. So case r.id.item purge, do something, and then break. And so what is that we're gonna do?
Call the delete just create that.
Right. So do we have a reference to our Yamba application here? Okay, so I may as well create that to save me time from like typing the whole thing. So I'm just gonna create here Yamba application, Yamba, right? And then on create, I'm just gonna create it. So I'll say Yamba is, and then I have to cast it. Yamba application, and then get application. Actually, I need double quotes, double parentheses there. So just so it just makes it easier for me. So I'm not typing this whole long thing here, right? That's all. Because it's something that's readily available to us. So just kind of shortcut to make it easier for us to do that. I should be consistent and move my these guys up to the top. So now that I have Yamba, then processing the button, it becomes really easy. It's basically Yamba dot status data dot delete, gone, right? Now I could do something to tell the user that it was deleted, right? So I could actually do something like toast dot make text, right? This, I need to come up with some text. This is going to be toast dot length long dot show, right? And then text, to be proper, I should really now open up my values, strings, add another message, right here where all my messages are. So I'll do it manually. String name equals, and I'll say MSG all data purged. So all data has been purged, something like that, right? And then back to my status data, and as oops, not status data, but status activity, and then text becomes r.string dot message all data purged. Reformat. And just to test, I'll give you guys then a chance to do it yourself, but just want to test it. So I'm gonna go into my database first. So SQLite 3 star. So select star from statuses. Bam, there's data, right? So now if I go here, menu, there's a menu item. Click on purge. All data has been purged. And then I do select star from statuses. Gone. Woohoo! Was that hard? You just increased the value of your application from like 19 cents to like 23 cents, right? And it took you only a couple of minutes, right? Because we now have the framework to make it like a little easier, right? So again, just to kind of really quickly, so what we did is we simply added a new delete function to our status data, which is readily available to the rest of the system, which simply just calls database.delete, and then we added a new menu, just like we added 3 menus yesterday, the day before, right? And we then just handled that by calling Yamba status data delete. That's it. Okay, so I'll help you out now.
From this one, it will go up a little bit
On create options menu,
yeah. If,
but that hasn't changed in a while.
yeah, this one.
Okay, but in the meantime, what I also want to test, I haven't tested if mine works, so I'm gonna say run service. I'm gonna look at the logcat really quick. Okay, that seems to work. I can do now select star from statuses again, and it did work, and so that seems to have worked. Okay, so mine works. But so this was basically stuff from yesterday, right? That was updating the service. That was inflating the menu. You guys good? Just to again review. So what we did is we got rid of our DB helper. We moved it into a new class called StatusData. So StatusData now has all the DB helper stuff, right? There it is. Now it's private to StatusData. So StatusData now creates DB helper when it starts up, right? And so it's readily available. And now StatusData provides nicely packaged methods. Insert for content values, insert for status, delete, right? So it's really nice, easy now to use StatusData. And these were basically doing the same work that we did before. So if I want to insert content values, I would need to open up the database for writing, do the DB insert, and then do close, right? So it's atomic. So this happens all in one thing, right? So now this StatusData, we hung it off of the Yamba application, right? So Yamba application now has a StatusData, and whenever Yamba application is created, it calls StatusData this, right? One another thing that we could do is Yamba application also has a method called terminate. So when your application is shut down, you can do something. This is just it'd be a nice thing to do. So what I would do is source override implement methods, and I would say on terminate, and I would provide an on terminate method to do something when we're done, right? Done with the application. So actually the system shuts down the app, removes the process and all that.
That is when you go from
Yeah, not when you leave a activity, not when activity gets stopped. So your application has its own life cycle, right? So for example, in status activity, we do this to create it. The opposite of this would be to implement a public void close, right? That would undo what we did here. So I may say db helper dot close, for example, to close any open database or anything like that. Okay, so that's the opposite. The flip side of a constructor would be a close, right? That would be a nice thing to do.
but you're just being nice to who?
I'm being nice to the system, so I'm being nice to the resources.
But
I'm
if I'm killed, the system's going to clean it all up anyway.
It will, but the system will clean up the objects. But the way it cleans up the objects is by checking who doesn't have any reference to being referenced by anything. So if you have an open database, then it's a little harder because it says, okay, this object is still maintaining the database. Maybe the database is maintaining the reference back to it. So you have this circular reference, and it just takes forever to like actually realize that that's subject. So database networks, things that are external to us. You kind of want to close them, and so Yamba application is a good opportunity to do all that. So status data dot close is now the opposite of status data this, right? So again, we have on create, the flip side is on terminate. So whatever you do here, you kind of want to undo here, that sort of stuff, right? So
Go back to the update service of Java.
yeah, and so in the update service.java, we simplified it dramatically by basically just saying Yamba status data insert, right? And Yamba is basically just a short form for this.
What exactly is in the on terminal?
In
Status data closes.
Yeah, so status data now has a close, which just closes whatever it opened, right? And then see here it's kind of like you have a constructor and the opposite is a close, as a quote-unquote destructor, right? And here you have the on create and the opposite would be on terminate. Yeah. Right, so that's why it was failing, yeah. Yeah.
The debug message is pretty good. This is a problem.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. So now we're back at square one. We basically, what we did today is just refactor stuff a little bit. We made it a little simpler, but our goal was to kind of abstract the data stuff behind something called status data. So now there's something called status data, which is global to the object, which is readily available, and that now deals with this. Later on, status data is actually going to become this guy's content provider. But for now, just so you know, it's, we kind of, just from Java standpoint, we wanted to isolate. So the rest of the system doesn't know anything about databases, which is a good design, right? Cool. Okay, so let's take a break now, and then we are gonna worry about timeline activity next.